Thank you, everybody, for coming today to hear us talk about volunteer management and board meeting engagement with specific focus on neighborhood associations. I'm Diane O'Day, and this is Dr. Paul Leisner, and we'll be talking to you today. Before we get started, we just like to go around the room and ask who everyone is in this room, because we like to know all the valuable expertise and experience we already have in this room. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, maybe. And I'm going to share my screen so we can, oh, no, hold on one second. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. So before we start, we just want to go around the room and ask you all to briefly introduce yourselves and just tell us a little bit about yourselves. So in particular, tell us what brought you here tonight, what you want to get out of this workshop, and what would make this workshop worthwhile to you. So I'll go ahead and start calling on people. Mary, you're at the top of my list. Welcome.
Hi, how are you? My name's Mary Jaron Kelly. I work for North Portland Neighborhood Services, which is a city-run coalition office located in North Portland. And I am very familiar with boards, but I always figure I can learn more. And that's why I wanted to come. Plus, we have lots of changes ahead of us. So just trying to pick up information that I may need a refresher on too. So thank you for doing this.
Great, thank you, Mary. And do feel free to be a co-facilitator whenever you feel like it. All right, Julie, you're the next on my list. Welcome.
Hi, thanks. I'm doing a neighborhood association project, so I'm multitasking right now.
Oh,
I am the secretary of the Multnomah Neighborhood Association in Southwest Portland. I got roped into it 2 years ago. I honestly don't know how it happened, and here I am. I'm just really unsure about how to engage our neighbors enough. And I'm here to learn everything I can.
great.
They'll,
Really welcome.
they'll hopefully read my chat message
All right, Mark, you're next on my list. Welcome.
Hey, hi, I'm Mark Barnett. I am the secretary of the Bridal Mile Neighborhood Association. So hi, Julie, another secretary. Yay. And we really could use some help in learning how to recruit and retain volunteers, like I'm sure many neighborhood associations feel.
Great, thank you, Mark. Marita, good morning or good afternoon, good evening. Oh my gosh.
Good evening, but the sun's shining. It could be morning.
Yeah, it's hard to.
Hi, Diane. Yeah, I'm with the Hayhurst Neighborhood Association. This is my 4th year as chair. I would like to, I think, just echo what's already been said about always learning something new and keeping our volunteers going forward. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Am I saying that right? Is it Marita?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Nancy, are you there?
I think she put in the chat that her camera and microphone weren't working.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mark. Okay. Thank you. And so Nancy's the president of the Arnold Creek Neighborhood Association. Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate your flexibility and patience and understanding. Okay, so let's move into it. So I'll tell you about us. I'll tell you about myself, then Paul will tell you about himself. So I'm Diane. I am a PhD candidate at Portland State University. I'm studying community engagement, values, and motivations. In particular, I'm actually looking at neighborhood associations and more specifically, neighborhood association board membership. So the values and motivations related to those things. I also work as a social equity consultant and volunteer for Neighbors West Northwest. So I've been working with Neighbors West Northwest for about 2.5 years now. And before then, I was involved with the Downtown Neighborhood Association's homeless and houseless team for about 4.5 years. So, Paul, you want to tell them about yourself?
Sure. Let's see, I'm unmuted. Good. Yeah, I'm Paul Leisner, and I've been a neighborhood activist in Portland for many years. And also, let me just, I, with my neighborhood, Mount Tabor, so I was the president, I was the secretary, I was everything. And then I was on the Southeast Uplift Board. Our district coalition was the chair there for a couple of years, and then spent 10 years working for the city of Portland, Office of Neighborhood Involvement, then Civic Life, as the neighborhood program coordinator. So I got to support and see what was happening, all the neighborhoods and district coalitions across the city, and provide support to them. I also did academic research. So my dissertation looked at the 40-year plus evolution of Portland's community and neighborhood engagement system, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that was fascinating for me to see that over time. And then now I'm working as a community engagement researcher at PSU, and also consulting with neighborhood associations, helping them with bylaws and strategic planning and other things like that. So, but I am actively involved in my neighborhood association, Mount Tabor, and we're recruiting volunteers for our cleanup this Saturday, and for an oral history event, that a project that we're doing, and getting people to identify cool sites in the neighborhood to put on our website. So I am also, like you guys, on the front lines in the thick of it. So I think we can all learn from each other as we move this forward. So I'm very grateful to be here with Diane. She's one of my favorite people, and an excellent, excellent resource. And she's done some fascinating research on volunteer recruitment and retention that she's going to share with us tonight. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Paul. And the feeling is definitely mutual. I've learned a lot of what I know with Paul. We've worked together on some civic engagement related projects. So thank you. All right, so let's get into it. So here's our agenda today. First off, we're going to talk about getting to know your potential volunteers. So like, what's a snapshot of what's going on with volunteers out there? Related to that, what are their preferences and motivations? Then we'll talk about the best practices of volunteer recruitment, best practices of volunteer retention, and then we'll get into discussing how to facilitate your neighborhood association board meetings with the goal of creating an inclusive, welcoming environment that does eventually end up resulting in more board membership and more activity on your boards. All right, let's get to know your potential volunteers. So you all mentioned that you're from different neighborhood associations, so you may be familiar with neighborhood characteristic profiles. So I'll link one in the chat for you just to look at. This is mine. I am a Goose Hollow resident. So if you have not seen what these look like before, Neighbors West Northwest has the original boundaries as linked there, or you can go to the City of Portland also has your neighborhood characteristics profiles. In essence, if you look at your neighborhood characteristics profiles, it'll tell you a few things about who's in your community. So today I'm going to primarily focus on, it can tell you where your youth are. It can tell you essentially that you have, whether or not you have a lot of families with children. It'll also tell you the level of education that individuals in your neighborhood have. There's also other populations to consider. This is by no means an exhaustive list. If you're more curious about how to support, English language learners, people who don't speak English as a first language, or how to support more marginalized individuals in society, I do have some trainings related to that coming up with Neighbors West Northwest. I also have a recording I'm happy to share with you now that a colleague and I did for Southeast Uplift. But today we're just going to focus on these very generalized populations. So other populations to consider that may be in your backyard are retirees and college students. So for instance, I'm in Goose Hollow. Goose Hollow has 2 major buildings filled with college students because it is home to student housing. Okay, so when it comes to volunteer types, there's a time element to different volunteers. So you have your one-time volunteers. So these are volunteers who will do annual events for you. They'll do one-time manual tasks. So these are the kinds of people who will show up for a trash cleanup, as Paul mentioned, a neighborhood cleanup. Or you have short-term volunteers. So these are people who are more likely to engage with you longer term than a one-time event, but not necessarily help out long term. So they'll do a time limited term on a board or committee if they see an end in sight, or a task force, or they'll be involved with an event planning. So say an event takes about 3 months to plan, they'll engage with you for that, but they're not going to do long-term sustained volunteerism, which is what long-term volunteers do. So examples of long-term volunteers are long-time board members, people who sustain their involvement by engaging regularly with their neighborhood neighborhood associations or other organizational activities. So now we're going to talk about, these are going to come back later, those types, but now we're going to talk about volunteer preferences and motivations. So there's 2 very broad preferences that people have when they're volunteering. So we have people who want to directly serve the population, meaning they want to directly interact with people. They want that human interaction. They want that peer-to-peer, neighbor-to-neighbor interaction. And there's other people who prefer to be behind the scenes. So I'm just going to poll you all. Go ahead and type in the chat for me. Which one do you prefer? Do you prefer to be more of a direct service type person or a more behind the scenes, also known as an indirect service kind of person? Okay, Julie says direct service. What do the rest of you think? Both. Mary says both. Yeah, you can do both for sure. I teach civic engagement. I asked my students this, and some of them were like, all of them, because I presented them with 4 options. I just presented you all with 2. Okay, Mark says both as well. All right, so it sounds like we kind of have a group of people who are willing to kind of get the job done however it needs to be done. Now, not everyone is that way, right? So some people want to be out in the front. They want to be out in their community. They want to be seen. They want to interact with people, and they want to see their impact. But there's also people who they don't want that. They just want to be behind the scenes and quietly help. So it's important to remember that. So when we talk about volunteer motivations, like I said, I've been researching this. So I have essentially started to categorize the different volunteer motivations into 2 primary buckets. So we have we have material motivations and we have non-material motivations. So material are motivations that are based on physical and tangible benefits of the volunteer opportunity. So some examples of that are people who can directly see a career-related benefit to what they're doing. Another material benefit is to fulfill school-related requirements. So Portland State University is in my backyard. A lot of students at Portland State University have to fulfill service learning requirements. So that is a benefit that they see when it comes to volunteering. Other people like to volunteer because it provides them with networking opportunities. Others like to volunteer because they like to see the immediate benefit they're providing to their community. So when you go do a neighborhood cleanup, you're seeing the beautification of your community right before your eyes. And it also could be an opportunity to use or develop skills. So if you have like website management skills and you want to develop them more, or if you like to do graphic design, but you don't really have an outlet for that, volunteering could be a great way for people to start using those skills. On the non-material side, these are benefits that are still benefits, but they're not as tangible as saying, oh, I developed a graphic design skill. Instead, these are more like philosophical benefits. So some non-material benefits include your belief in a cause, and related to that is if it connects to your personal interests. Another type of non-material benefit is that it feels good to work with and help others, so it gives you a sense of esteem. And then another non-material benefit is a sense of moral duty to engage with your community. So some people feel like it's very important that they engage because they have a duty. So once again, go ahead and type in the chat and try to choose one this time. Try to challenge yourself to choose one or two. I'll give you two. But go ahead and type in the chat which one of these kind of relate to you, or if you want to say it, feel free to say it as well. Okay, Julie says seeing immediate community benefits and it feels good to work with and help others. So in other words, Julie is saying, well, there's non-material and material benefits to why I civically engage. Marita says it's a civic duty. Yeah, some people feel that sense of civic duty, right? Mary says sharing a strength. So in other words, using your own expertise to help your community and share that with others. Like I said, I'm a PSU student. I can relate to that one because our motto is let knowledge serve the city. So that's definitely one that I believe in too. Mark, do you have anything? That's okay if you don't. Non-material. Okay, great. So we'll talk about this later, but one thing to think about as we move forward is, were the motivators you just said always your motivation? So one thing that I'm finding, so like I said, I've been working with college students, and I've also worked with retirees who run a senior center, and I've also worked with neighborhood association volunteers who kind of run the gamut of demographics. And one thing that I've noticed is that our motivations can change over time. So we'll get into that here in a second, but I really want you to start reflecting on, oh, was I always motivated by duty, or did other things motivate me in the past when I was a volunteer? Because the more you can reflect on your own motivations, the more you're able to understand other volunteers or potential volunteers at different stages of life. So like I said, this can change over time. So I made this very brief table, and I hope to continue to add to it over time. But in essence, when we think about volunteers related to your neighborhood characteristics profile, if you have a lot of youth and college students in your area, it's important to remember that those types are going to be more likely to be one-time volunteers or short-term volunteers. That's because they have a lot going on, and they're usually motivated to fulfill some kind of requirement for school, or to prepare for, if you see to the right, motivations can be things like career or wanting to see a direct impact on their community. So they like to a lot of youth and college students still have the perception that volunteerism is very direct impact, almost transactional in some ways. So if you want to recruit youth and college students, it's important to kind of focus on recruiting them for one-time volunteer opportunities or short-term volunteer opportunities. They generally can't take on longer term, and their motivations are they are motivated by essentially what's in it for them, what they're developing their career, and also how are they making an impact. So families with children, they can be anything. If you have a lot of families, you really could do anything with them. But a few things that motivate them is, I wrote affiliation here. That means that they like to network with people. So you know how we say it takes a village to raise a child. So families with children, they're often looking for opportunities to enhance what we call bridging relationships with other neighbors. So they're trying to get to know people. And they also, a lot of times, are motivated by a belief in the cause. So they believe in healthy communities in the context of a neighborhood association because they're raising their children in those communities. So they want to create a sense of belonging amongst everybody. So retirees, if you have a lot of retirees in your area, they're more likely to be long-term volunteers. This is because retirees generally have a lot of expertise and experience that they can lend to longer term opportunities such as board membership. And they also happen to have more time than families with children or youth and college students or career professionals. It's just a fact. If you're retired, I don't know if that's a myth, but you tend to have more time. And motivators for retirees, it's interesting because youth aren't as motivated to make connections with their peers, because when you think about it, youth have built-in connections with their peers, right? Through the institutions they're in. So they may have part-time jobs, they go to school, so they are surrounded by a lot of peers that are their same age, that have a lot of their same interests. So they're actually not as motivated to volunteer because they want to get connected to others. Whereas retirees, on the other hand, retirees tend to, they may have moved away to another area. They have lost a lot of their social networks because if they've moved, or if they've retired, they've lost a lot of their career-related networks. Are not going to work every day and engaging with people. So they're seeking out opportunities to spend time with people. Retirees are also more likely to volunteer out of a sense of duty or obligation. So they have lived a lot of life and they see why it's so important to engage. And also it connects to their beliefs. And like I said, these motivations can apply to anybody, but these are just some like very broad generalizations. So when it comes to educated professionals, and like I said, this is related to your neighborhood characteristic profiles. So if you see that you have a lot of people who are educated in your area, chances are they want to be a long-term volunteer on a board because they want to share their expertise. or they want to be a one-time volunteer, meaning they're too busy to engage long-term, but they're happy to show up for one-time events, depending on the career. They also love to be out and about to see people and network with people. So they are primarily motivated by career, and by career that could be for career networking purposes, or also some careers actually have an expectation that the further you get in your career, the more volunteerism and board membership you should be engaging in. So they may be doing it in preparation for a career move or career promotion if they are involved on boards. Okay, so now we're gonna get into volunteer recruitment. So when we think about how to actually get people involved, so one thing that we need to remember is that our board memberships start with volunteers engaging with us on maybe a short-term basis. Maybe they attend an event, maybe they come to a cleanup, maybe they come to a meeting because they're a board meeting because they're interested. So it's essentially that those smaller activities serve as gateways to cultivate relationships for long-term sustained recruitment with your volunteers. So I personally got involved with the Downtown Neighborhood Association because they hosted an event on houselessness and homelessness back in 2019. And because I attended this forum and I was so impressed and I really wanted to engage on the topic because it connects to my core beliefs, that's how I initially got engaged. And since then I got engaged with their committee, and then I've also been engaged obviously with the coalition. So I want you all to keep that in mind when you're recruiting people. That first contact is very important to sustaining and growing your board membership. So when we think about different sources for volunteers, there's plenty, but here are just some basic examples. So a lot of volunteers will actually start because of a personal connection. So someone will say, hey, why don't you come to this cleanup with me? Why don't you come to this forum with me? Hey, did you hear about this meeting that's happening? So personal connections is really important. So you all as board members, the more you share your experiences with other people, the more that will get them interested. That could help depending on what you're sharing, right? But that could help them get interested in your board membership in your neighborhood association. Another form of recruitment is social media. So people see something, an opportunity posted on social media, they may be more likely to go and do that opportunity or attend that meeting. Service organizations is a great source of especially one-time volunteer opportunities. So you may not know this, you may know this already, but there are service organizations such as I'm just going to use the Boy Scouts as an example, that you can form connections with who can come and assist for one-time events. So say you're hosting a community event and you need extra people, you can reach out to local troops and ask them if they'd like to help. So related to service organization, schools and universities do have, they also have service organizations located within them, but also schools and universities may have classes that specifically require that their students engage. So like I mentioned earlier, Portland State University does have a very robust civic engagement system where they do require that a lot of their students engage in service learning prior to graduating. Faith-based organizations is also a great source of volunteers. People like to do good, and if they're already connected with each other, they'll come out in groups to help out, to work with you all. And also creating ads on volunteer recruitment websites is a great source of recruitment. So we're about to look at what that looks like. So some strategies you can use: word of mouth, like I mentioned. You can also create flyers or brochures that give general information about the opportunities you're recruiting for. You can post on volunteer service websites, which like I said, I'll show you. You can also meet with key connections and conduits. So you can meet with a faith-based organization's leader. You can meet with a culturally specific organization's leader and use that connection to advertise different events you may be having, or when you're recruiting for board membership, you can share it with them and they'll get it out to other people. Now, upcoming, if you check the Neighbors West Northwest website, Paul and I will also be getting more into detail about connecting with community organizations specifically in a future workshop. Also, social media is a great way to recruit people, especially younger generations get a lot of their information via social media. So when it comes to strategies, so what do I need to include in my flyer? What do I need to include on the website, in my social media posts? Well, people need to have a clear purpose. They need to know what they're getting into. Also, they need to be clear on the roles and tasks that will be required of them. So related to that is time commitment. So if you need someone to be on the board, say you need somebody to do your social media. That's what I'm trying to recruit right now for a board I'm on. So what kinds of tasks would they be expected to do? How many hours a month would you expect them to be doing that? And finally, it needs to connect to their personal motivations and interests. So in other words, I'm going to be more likely, if I'm recruiting a social media volunteer, I'm going to be more likely to find somebody if I connect it to, do you want to develop your graphic design skills? Well, join our organization to help us out as a social media volunteer. All right, so here is an example. This is volunteermatch.org, and I will be giving you a link with some useful websites, but go ahead and look at this for a second and tell me, you can either say it on chat or you can say it on your mic. Tell me what about this ad pops out to you.
Well, it's easy to find the I want to help button in the center. It's red. That's nice. And it looks easy.
Mm-hmm. And it says, I want to help, right? So then it sparks something and you're like, yeah, I want to help, right?
And it looks limited, right? It's one shift. I have to be available on a Friday afternoon.
So then I'm like, that's not bad. That's not bad. One shift, I can do that. What else do you all notice?
Requirements.
Yeah, so it's telling you what you would need to do in order to actually volunteer. So you need to do a background check, you need to do an orientation, and you have to have a pretty substantial physical ability, right? So like I mentioned, I work with college students. Some of my college students have decided not to do an opportunity because of the paperwork associated with it. So for example, one of my students didn't want to do a background check or an orientation for to work with the Humane Society. So then they changed their project because they didn't want to go through that. That was too much extra time. What else do you all notice? And I can
Depending on how the people are motivated at the top right, it reminds you the you know, the causes that this supports to see if it aligns with what your motivations are.
Yeah, absolutely. So the header says, get food out to your neighbors facing hunger. So it's like a call to action, but it's also calling out to your beliefs. And then off to the right, you see cause areas. So it tells you you're contributing to advocacy and human rights, you're contributing to less hunger, right? And you're helping immigrants and refugees with this opportunity. So it connects to your beliefs, right? Now, something else you may notice if you look a little bit below in the middle, like, so there's this kind of sidebar on the right, and it says in the middle here, it says skills under this map. If you just go a little bit down, it tells you what skills you'll be developing. So you'll be learning how to multitask. You'll be developing your people skills, building relationships. So that's related to the affiliation, right? And you'll be problem solving. So if I'm a youth, if I'm 19 and I don't have a really great resume yet, I may look at this and go, ooh, these would all be really great things I can put on my resume eventually. So let's practice. If you know how up top it says, get food out to your neighbors facing hunger. If you were recruiting somebody, and this is a website where you can post your opportunities. If you were recruiting someone, how would you phrase it? Like, what is your one-liner that you would say for your neighborhood associations?
To volunteer to become active in the actual neighborhood association.
Yeah, or whatever you have going on. So if you have a cleanup going on, I would say I'll use the cleanup one while you're thinking, because I'm putting you on the spot, right? So I'll think through it too as you all are thinking through it. I'm taking neighborhood cleanup. So I may say something like, keep our neighborhood beautiful. So keep Goose Hollow beautiful. Or let's do our part in keeping Goose Hollow sustainable and beautiful.
Yeah, I struggle was I do events all the time, you know, very specific, and that's the easy part. The harder one is, how do you communicate excitement and urgency for joining a neighborhood association? That's the trick for me. How do you create that excitement and urgency and desire?
Mm-hmm. Well, what made you feel that sense of urgency or desire?
Well, for me, somebody had asked me to help with a specific project, and then I don't know what happened. I don't know.
That's exactly it though, right? So someone asked you to get involved with something small, and then you said, I don't know what happened. Well, you got bought in, right? So that's how it happened. So these smaller events, that is a gateway to longer term involvement. So if you cultivate a good experience, if you create that sense of duty and purpose and create a good experience with these smaller activities, then you can go, hey, I'm just using.
Yeah, I think to your point, like specifically, you know, getting excitement and urgency over a social media person and also a new treasurer, like I think like that seems like something that I could fill out this, you know, like
Yeah.
Making a meet, bookkeepers unite, who wants to be the like you could figure out a way to try to create that excitement and urgency about a role, not just a general thing, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's where you would maybe want to think, oh, what are some conduits? Okay, if I need a treasurer, okay, are there schools nearby that have finance majors who maybe want to work on those skills? Are there bank employees nearby who want to give back to their communities? Are there accounting firms? So that's where those conduits would also come in. All right, so I'm going to move forward because I want to give enough time to Paul. So here is another flyer. So this flyer says up top, to build a more inclusive workforce, we need you. So it's a call to action. And then it says join a movement. So let's be part of a movement where there's thousands of us involved. So you'll notice that this flyer in particular tells you, essentially gives you a menu of involvement options. So if you have 1 hour to volunteer, you can help by looking at resumes, helping with mock interviews, or doing informational interviews with college students. If you have 1 day to spare for people, you can help with a Saturday workshop or volunteer for their career day. If you have 2 years to spare, you can volunteer for their mentorship program. And then beyond giving a menu of different options, it gives you outcomes that you'll be contributing to. So this says, because of you, students will complete internships, graduate from college, and begin careers. So in other words, it's saying we need you, and then as a result, look at all this great work you'll do. So for your neighborhood association, if I were to change this into a neighborhood association flyer, I would maybe say, to build a stronger neighborhood, we need you. Join a movement of join in to contribute to a sense of community amongst your blankety blank neighbors, however many you have according to your neighborhood characteristic profile. And then I'd maybe say, Paul, how long do those cleanups usually are? 3 hours, 4 hours?
Yeah, our cleanup, it's technically from 9 to 1, but
Okay.
we get there at 7 and it takes a while to clean up. So we have 2 shifts and we tell people you can unload stuff into the dumpsters, you can check people in, you can wrangle styrofoam. So we give them a whole bunch of different kind of tasks to choose from. But
Okay.
we emphasize it's fun, you
Mhm.
meet people.
So I would maybe say 3 hours cleanups. 1 day, like, so here in Goose Hollow, we have Goose Holidays. 1 day helping with Goose Holidays. 2 years board membership. Because of you, our neighborhood will have strong, create a sense of community, have a strong role in decision making, or contribute to a sense of beauty in our community. So thinking through what the outcomes of that involvement would be is important.
And helping people feel connected with each other. That's a big draw because a lot of people they may
Make
not even know
friends.
their neighbors.
Know your neighbors, will have a more robust stronger community ties. So you can do this on your own time, but this is a link, and I'll have some resources on there for you, where you can start setting goals related to your volunteer recruitment. So let's get into volunteer retention very quickly. So when say you have volunteers, say you have people who express an interest, you have to make sure that you're keeping track of them and also that they feel appreciated. So when we make sure our volunteers feel appreciated, we do things like we send thank you cards or small gifts that are tokens of appreciation. We express verbal appreciation. That goes a long way. That's often underestimated. Hosting volunteer appreciation events to thank everybody, or giving certificates of appreciation. These are all some great ways to retain current volunteers, and also to maintain your volunteers. So say you have people who helped with a one-time event, but you maybe want to market to them later or ask them for their help for the next event. It's important to have a clear plan on how you're tracking them. So essentially having a clear database that includes basic things such as contact information, availability, and what their preferred interests are. So like I said, here are some examples. I duplicated that, apologies. So here's a volunteer database example. You can create this in Excel. This is software. You can buy software if you really wanted to. It can get expensive, but this is pretty doable in Excel. So if you'll notice, it has, and I would add contact information in this. It just doesn't have it for this, but it has name and it has day, like availability, different skills or interests that people are involved in. And this also, it would be important to keep track of what people have done. That way, say you send a card every year, you can say, hey, thank you for your help with program 2 and 4. Because you kept track of it. So helping people feel seen and recognized for their volunteerism is one way to keep them feeling good, which keeps them engaged, which eventually helps them get involved in your board membership.
Hey, Diane, what tool were you using? Was that just like an Excel you were populating, or how does everyone right now obtain and maintain volunteers, contact information, and preferences like that?
So this is software, but primarily I've seen people just keep track of this. You can do Google Sheets, which is free, or you can use software, but Google Sheets or Excel. I've set something up like this in Excel before, and you can also do it based on different programs, based on different initiatives. But Google Sheets, you can pretty much replicate this.
Thanks.
And this is a volunteer retention worksheet. That would just help you kind of figure out how are you going to appreciate your volunteers. Okay. Paul, I'm going to hand it over to Paul. And I'm available for questions after, because we had the delay. I just want to make sure to give Paul enough time.
So Diane, if you can go to the components of a successful board meeting, I guess it's the next slide. There it is. Okay. So I'm going to quickly cover some of these things, and then we can go into any of them in more depth according to what is most interesting and useful to you guys. But I think Diane just did a beautiful job of sort of laying out some very important ways to frame our thinking as neighborhood leaders and people who are trying to engage others. And one of them is sometimes people try to get volunteers and the community members to come work on things that are important to the neighborhood board members. And so that's important because there are certain things that the neighborhood's trying to do. But I really encourage all of you to think of what value does your neighborhood association provide to your community members. That's what, like Diane was saying, or like Julie, what you said about how you got involved on a project and then, you got sort of sucked into the neighborhood association. It's not about just trying to recruit board members cold. It's about trying to figure out where is people's energy in the community? What do your community members care about? Are there projects or things people are angry about or hopeful about? We're doing some recruiting now around oral history projects, people who grew up in the neighborhood. We're doing a history event where people are being invited to come tell sort of short stories about growing up in the neighborhood, share some photos that we'll scan in. So we had a woman she used to teach history in Wisconsin at the university level. She's helping with that because that's an area of expertise for her. So it's an entry point for somebody. We have people who are sort of excited about organizing a block party or community event just on their street to get to know their neighbors. So we're putting together a little guide for how to do that. They don't want to join the neighborhood association board right now, but they do want us to work with them to do something they have energy around, which is to engage their neighbors. So again, this idea of look for people's energy, look for their interests, like Diane said, and recognizing that people at different stages in life and different life circumstances are going to have different interests. So it's important for us as neighborhood leaders to know ourselves and what motivates us, but also to be able to step out of that and realize people are different and experiencing life very differently in our society. Men, women, dominant culture members, people of color, people of different faith communities. So I think broadening your idea of who's out there, what do they care about, how can we bring them in? And again, there are things that your neighborhood thinks are important, but if you can always try to find out from people who they are, how they process information, what excites them, go for the energy, go for the excitement. Once you see that, all those things Diane said, praising people, giving them opportunities to be successful, having wins, connecting them with others, helping them feel like they're providing value and are recognized for it. So that's a bigger context. But then in how you run your board meetings, as Diane said, that sends people a real signal about what kind of an organization you are. How welcoming are you? How sort of are you the top-down leader? That's sort of the least effective form of leadership. We see it a lot pop up in the neighborhood system. People say, it's my neighborhood association now, I'm running this, and we're going to do what I want, and I'm going to be a gatekeeper, and I'm going to shut people down if they're not talking about what I want to talk about. Not very inviting or inclusive. It's much better to be a facilitative kind of a leader, to really try to get people to talk about what they care about, what their energy is, and then co-produce with them. If you see somebody's got, like we had somebody in the neighborhood last year wanted to do a neighborhood-wide garage sale. There was some interest around that, and then they moved. But so we're going to do a call out for neighbors. Anybody who's interested in organizing a neighborhood-wide bunch of garage sales across the neighborhood on a single day, like some neighborhoods do, let's have a meeting, let's get involved. So trying to figure out, throw these things out, like the History Project, like other things. So where's the energy? Facilitating people, helping them feel heard and recognized. So again, how you run your meetings send some real clear signals of what kind of an organization you are, and people are watching you and deciding, yeah, that's maybe not for me, I don't feel that comfortable, or I feel excited, I feel welcome, I feel like I could actually have some fun and do something positive in this organization. So, having that on your radar is really important. Obviously, following your bylaws and policies. Your bylaws is your operation manual for how your organization's supposed to run. So definitely follow your processes and your policies and help people understand what they are. That also gives them confidence that there's some structure and purpose, and that you do follow rules and they can know what's going on. Also, it's always important to remember, neighborhood associations and any nonprofits, the board is in charge, not the officers and not the committee chairs or anything like that. And that also is important. If the president is trying to shove through a bunch of stuff that the rest of the group doesn't want, that can also really discourage involvement. Some people will stick with it out of a sense of duty, but if they don't feel they have a voice in decision-making, that also sort of pushes people away. So really listen to people, involve them in the decision-making is very important. So the whole board is in charge. There was one neighborhood I was working with recently. The majority of the board members wanted to create an events committee, and the chair was not very comfortable with that idea, but it wasn't really up to that person. It was up to the whole board. And so once the board realized they were in charge, they charged ahead and created this events committee, and a whole bunch of people signed up to get involved with it, and now it's off and running. So, the chair, she was very good and highly skilled, but I think seeing that perspective, where is the energy on this board, and helping other people feel heard on the board. Developing and applying ground rules. Again, how we function in a meeting. Some people are very confident, they're comfortable domineering or, taking a lot of time, pushing things forward. Look around your group as other people are doing in the group. Do you have some people who maybe they don't feel quite as comfortable, battling it out with others for space on the agenda or to get their voices heard? Looking for opportunities to go around and really hear from people who have different communication styles. That's an important area that for a lot of neighborhood associations, learning how to give space to different people and to sort of calm down and realize we're not all processing information the same way or processing our life experiences the same way. So developing some basic ground rules, and we've got an example of that to show you, but one person speaks at a time. Don't attack people, to focus on the issues. All ideas, are sort of, valid, or we're open to hearing from different people. So develop some ground rules, and it's good for the group to do that. You could throw out some basic ideas, but then have the group. I've watched lots of neighborhood associations, they'll amend their ground rules to actually respond to issues, tensions, things that come up in the meeting. So again, it gives people confidence that there are some rules, and then have a system for actually enforcing them so that people can stop the meeting and say, well, we said we weren't going to do personal attacks. What this person just said sounded like a personal attack. And as the person facilitating, I would say, okay, let's stop and look at that. Do we all still buy into these ground rules, or do we want to change them and allow personal attacks? So again, having some mechanisms for creating a safe environment, a welcoming environment, and take the time to create human connections on your board. You're all complex people with a lot of different stuff going on, but oftentimes in groups, we don't learn that about each other because we get so focused on the agenda and marching through the agenda. And so what a number of neighborhood associations have started to do is icebreakers, and an icebreaker. And my personality, I often want to know the icebreaker ahead of time because I stress out about the correct answer to the icebreaker. But, just saying something, your favorite food, your favorite sign of spring, what's a great book that you've just recently read, or something that you allow people to go around the room, introduce themselves, where do they live in the neighborhood, are they on the board, and just say very briefly something about, the neighborhood, food, a holiday. But it's amazing what kind of sharing comes out of that. And we learn things about each other that we didn't know before, and we see each other as human beings, and it really is a great equalizer. So having something like that really makes people feel welcome. Again, early in your agenda in the meeting, after the introductions of that, go through the agenda, maybe you look at the minutes and the treasurer's report, but then have a placeholder in the agenda always for, is there anybody here who came to the meeting tonight about an issue or with a concern or something that's not on the agenda? And so once again, that's welcoming. It says, we care about you, we're interested in you. Doesn't mean you need to spend time on the agenda on whatever issue it is, but it allows you they feel heard early in the meeting, not having to wait till the end. And that it also shows that you care about that, and then you can follow up with them, because anybody who expresses an interest, a concern, means you can follow up, make a connection with them, and see if you can work with them. That's what starts to make people feel like, oh, this organization provides value, they care about me, they respect me. And that's where your future volunteers and your board members come from, is all those little portals and entryways, like what Julie and Diane were talking about. Have clear and realistic agendas. You got to have an agenda. It's got to be clear of what you're talking about, and don't pack it full of stuff that you're always running over and you're not getting to things. So have some discipline around that. And if the group wants to spend more time on something than you've allotted on the agenda, that's okay. Stop the meeting and say, well, we've got these other things on the agenda. Do you all want to spend more time on this, or should we move on? And if the group wants to spend more time, then you figure out what you're going to drop from the agenda. Again, showing respect. They have a voice, they have effect. So managing time well, don't run over, don't let people go on, but do it in a nice way. That transition where maybe you're getting to the end of the time, there's somebody with a lot of energy on that, praise them, say, thank you so much for sharing those important thoughts. You know, you've really helped us get a better understanding of this. We sort of need to move on now, but we really appreciate what you did, versus, which I've also seen, people at neighborhood associations that say, I'm the timekeeper, you're out of time, I'm cutting you off. That hurts people's feelings. You still need to cut them off, but you needed to do it in a kind way that, again, shows compassion, caring, but you need to manage your meetings well, but it's how you do it. There are all sorts of components to effective facilitation like that. You know, what's the energy in the room? What's the agenda? It's great to have a timekeeper or someone who can say in a nice way, you know, we've got 2 minutes left on this item or whatever, but that you're treating people well, you're hearing people, and you don't just ignore someone if they brought up something that's important to them. You acknowledge it and then, you know, say we'll get to that later or something like that, but acknowledging people, but, you know, maintaining that facilitation. But again, you work with the group. You're not a traffic cop to just ram your agenda through. If there's real energy or something around something, you adjust as you go. And, you know, Diane is very good at that in classrooms of working with students to say, where's their energy? What's happening? How do we adjust to where we're going? So that's a real skill, I think, for all of you as neighborhood leaders, is how to run an effective meeting that helps people feel good, gets to important things, and manages your time well. Know your decision-making process. Robert's rules, do not use Robert's rules. You should not have Robert's rules in your bylaws, or you to use them in your meeting. The Robert's Rules is a 600+ page book of all sorts of things, but you need to have some sort of decision-making process. There's sort of the very simpler pared down approaches where, you know, you have somebody make a motion. If somebody seconds it, then you're going to have more discussion. If nobody seconds it, it's not, you know, a good use of the group's time, so you drop it. But then you have some discussion. People can make amendments if the original people making the motion agree or whatever, and then you vote. Okay, that's one approach. And a simplified version of that is really what is appropriate for most neighborhoods. The other option is consensus, where you really work to, unless everybody agrees, you don't do something. And that sounds scary to people, but I have seen that work extremely well in groups, because it makes people really much more confident that their voice will be heard. But it, you know, if you've got especially a contentious neighborhood association, sometimes that's hard to manage. But know what your decision-making process is, and let everybody know, and stick to it, and know how to manage it. And just, again, you know, there's the major focus for these meetings and for your neighborhood as association as a whole is thinking, how can we all be providing value to the community, helping people feel heard, feel understood, helping them to sort of follow their energy and work on things, helping them to connect with each other and build a sense of community. That's when neighborhood associations are the strongest, is when we're sort of catalysts. We're a place where people can come and work on things they care about, meet other people. And like Diane was saying, you make linkages with other groups in the community. Like for our cleanup, we have 2 different churches that we have really good relationships with. One sending snacks and stuff, like bringing that. The other one is sending a whole bunch of volunteers, some of them quite elderly, but we have roles for them as well. But again, you know, as you build those relationships with different organizations in your community, you're all helping each other. So again, that idea of respect, relationship building, co-production, helping each other, amplifying the neighborhood voice. That's when neighborhood association work gets really, really exciting and gratifying. So Diane, I know we might be short on time. Let's see.
You have 10 minutes. You had a question in the chat. Marita was curious, what software are you using for your oral histories? And then I'll move on to the next slide while you answer that.
Well, Marita, what software do you know about for oral histories? Do you know of any particular softwares?
Well, no, I'm just curious. We're interested in doing an oral history project too. So I thought, oh, wow. I was wondering if you had something specific that you were using, or you just recording people.
We don't yet. One thing that we're going to do is we're going to have our historian. She knows that we need to have a form that for people to sign that says gives us permission, one, to have them to use their information, to record their story. What we're going to do is we're going to do initial, like, just 3-minute recordings. They say a favorite thing they experience in the neighborhood, a favorite place in the neighborhood, something like that. They give us some initial stuff, and then we'll be able to follow up with people on that. But that's a great question. I'm going to look into that. And ideally, what we're hoping is if you're interested in it too, our neighborhood's looking for other neighborhoods who would be willing to guinea pig this together. And that we're happy to share. We're going to do this event in May where we're going to have people come see a bunch of historical photos and stuff, share stories. And that's going to be our kickoff for this. But that's a great question for, what software to use.
Yeah, just
again,
curious. It's a great idea. That sounds like a lot of fun. I might have to come and see how yours goes. Thank you.
And working with other neighborhood associations, like we do our cleanup with North Tabor and Mount Tabor have done the cleanup together for years. We could do it by ourselves. They could do it by themselves. But when we do it together, we share sort of relationships. And we found out that one of the North Tabor people who's worked on the cleanup for years with me, he actually does historical home tours of Mount Tabor. It wasn't until I mentioned our history project that we found out he was that resource. So now he's going to do a free tour that he does with us, that he usually does with our neighborhood. So
wow.
Get people talking. What are you interested in? What projects do you want to do? What do they care about? And suddenly all these skills and opportunities open up for you. So I think sometimes we get very beleaguered when we're neighborhood leaders. It's overwhelming. It can be sort of feeling isolated. You're trying to carry the whole neighborhood yourself, thinking of everything, nobody's helping. But when you start to change the focus, more in like what Diane's saying and what we were talking about, it gets easier and a lot more fun. And you go with the energy. If there's no energy around something, even though you might think it's important, unless you're willing to do it yourself, which is okay, take the lead in that. Sometimes you need to drop that. And I had to learn that as a neighborhood chair, that there were lots of things I thought was important, but I realized if there's no energy in the neighborhood association to do anything about it, I need to let that go. So again, it's reframing how we look at our role and how we look at the neighborhood association as an element in a fabric of civic organizations and civic energy and civic interests in our community. So this was just the ground rules. There are a whole bunch of these different things. I encourage you all to have something, if you're not already. And it's fun to see if you have any good examples that you're using in your neighborhood, I would love to see them. I sort of collect these. But this is a great one to start with. Let's see.
You have a question from Nancy.
Nancy.
And it says, how does taking time to see if someone has an issue outside the agenda differentiate from new business? And I'll move on to the next slide while you answer that.
Yeah, because it's a question of, well, who gets to say what the new business is? And maybe it's this like that red button on the website that Diane showed on the volunteer stuff. If there's a way to frame this as, you could say a new business, but as long as you're saying, we want to hear from people. What do you care about? What do you want to do that's not on the agenda? But especially asking it at the beginning of the meeting, because sometimes people will sit through an hour and a half meeting, and then at the very end, they're desperately trying to say, well, I came because I was concerned about this. As a neighborhood leader, boy, is that helpful to know that ahead of time, because then you can say, oh, so-and-so here is on our land use committee. They actually know how that works, and let's get you two together outside the meeting to work on that. But again, it shows to other people you care about what people came for. So Nancy, you're right. New business. Yeah, it is. I guess it is new business, but it's sort of how you use that as a tool to signal to people in the room, especially not just your diehard board members, but people who might be considering whether to get involved, that you are a welcoming, caring place. Nancy, I don't know, did that answer your question? I know you're without microphone and
Nancy wrote, yes, thanks.
okay, good.
You, Nancy. And we'll put our emails up too, because I know we're getting thin on time. So if you do have follow-up questions, Paul and I are certainly available and willing to answer those or point you to somebody who can answer it if we can't.
Yeah, and this chart that Diane helped me put together is just sort of what we already talked about. You know, there are things about, you know, these are the good practices and the do sign, and the don't thing is the things you shouldn't do. And so again, you're sculpting, you're creating an environment in your meetings. And so I think it's good to be aware of that. It's not just working your way in a linear fashion through your agenda. It's what kind of an atmosphere you're creating, how welcoming you are, how you're building relationships and confidence and supporting people to really feel excited about being involved in your neighborhood association. I think the last one, what did we have? Just the stoplight cards. This was just a tool for, I'm working with one neighborhood association where they had a lot of some very domineering people and then other people who were much less domineering who really felt never heard in the board meetings. And so we have this tool where the facilitator can take the pulse of the room. Everybody's got these cards, the colored cards. And so the person, she can say, you know, how are we all feeling about this? Are we ready to go to vote? Hold up your green card. If you have concerns, more discussion needed, yellow. If you're absolutely opposed to this, red. And so you get the temperature of the room, and especially then you can zero in on people who may hold up a yellow card or something and say, tell me more about what's going on with you. What are you thinking? Whereas they may not speak up otherwise. So you just need to assess your group. What are the group dynamics like? There are tools like this that can help you sort of get at those different communication styles. So again, a lot of volunteer recruitment and retention is creating a welcoming environment where you build on people's energy and excitement. You have positive relationships. You look forward to getting together and working together. That's what we're all, I think, working toward ideally. Okay, Diane, I'll stop there.
So thank you, everybody. We are willing to stay for a few minutes after 8 o'clock, but you know, as Paul just said, it's important that we're mindful of everybody's time. So like I said, if you can't stay and ask questions, please feel free to reach out to us. These are our email addresses where we can be reached, and we'll also be sending a recording of this out to everybody.
Thank you. This is Julie. I have a question about the actual meetings themselves. You know, when we talk about, you know, we provide the agenda a week beforehand, and it has, you know, opening. We go through the committee reports really quickly. We normally have a speaker, and you know, a lot of the hour and a half of our time is really, really, really boring. You know, we're talking about, you know, grants and submitting taxes and, you know, walkability subcommittee, blah, blah, blah. And the people that attend, I mean, I'm the secretary. I have to be there because I have to do the minutes. I don't want to be there. So how do we tell people become part of the neighborhood association? It's like, in my mind, the subcommittees are cool. You want to make a mural, you want to go clean up trash, you want to go babysit kids, you want to go, you know, those are, that resonates with me. But how do we create an engaging 90 minutes where people actually say, oh, it's Tuesday, it's the first Tuesday of the month, can't wait to have dinner and attend my meeting? And are people doing hybrids, or are they really doing, are they mainly doing in person or 100% virtual?
Well, the last one first, the hybrids are working better and better. And so like my neighborhood, we just did a test run because we're talking about moving from Zoom back to hybrid. So we finally had our space and we got the Cully Association of Neighbors, their board member, who's a tech guy, brought their owl to our meeting place, and we had the guy, the secretary from the Richmond neighborhood, who manages their owl and their hybrid meetings, signed into our meeting, and our secretary. And so we all did it together, and it worked great. So we're going to start switching back to that. But the owl is sort of the key thing, having that 360-degree camera and microphone, and a way to then project that. You still do it through Zoom. There's special Zoom settings to make it work. But I would really encourage everybody to do the hybrid meetings, because there's so many people who, they're late coming home from work, they got to eat something, they're not going to get to the meeting. But if they can Zoom in, or they're taking care of their kids, or they're older and maybe at night they don't want to be out so much. So boy, this hybrid thing is the way to go. OWL has a discount program for nonprofits, so we're getting our OWL for $900 instead of $1,050. But it's one of these investments that I think will make your meetings much more welcoming. So I'm I'm hoping that all of us neighborhood people can get together and do a guide that we can share everything we've learned with everybody else. So we can all figure out how to do this together, not have to invent it separately. But with the meetings, again, boring meetings, you got to sort of think about, there's a sense of board meetings, and sometimes board meetings are more about running the organization. And then there are general membership meetings, which are more about the general membership. So some neighborhoods actually try to divide that for that purpose. So you have the board meet, and some meet on the same night. Maybe the board meeting's at the end of the general membership meeting. Then you do business stuff. But in the general membership meeting, that's when you hear from neighbors, you have the speaker. It's more, you've got to know your audience. People don't want to be bored. They won't come back. So again, having that sense, is there a way that you can get your committees to send out, brief little reports via email to the board members ahead of time, so you don't need to spend a lot of time on those committee reports. You got to look for, are there ways that we can readjust how we're spending the time in the meeting? And then again,
I love the idea of changing, the 90 minutes to being 30 and 60. What are you thinking, Mark? Did you raise your hand? Your little hand? Oh, that was me. That was my hand wasn't right next to your head, so it looked like you were raising your hand.
So I'm on a board that recently switched to having the committee reports written in the agenda. So our secretary will ask, we have designated people, and it's a nonprofit board, so it's not a neighborhood association board, but we have designated people that represent each committee. And so we've been submitting just quick bullet point reports, and then we just say, all right, it was in our packet. Does anybody have any questions? That way, so these meetings can be boring the more passive they are, right? So the more that you have to sit and just listen. So then that shifts it to, okay, what questions do you have? That way it results in more interaction instead.
And there's also that facilitation, again, techniques of, if you can get people to give a very brief summary and keep them to it. And if they start going on and on, you can say, we've got to move on with the agenda. Thank you so much for that committee report. If people have questions about that, maybe they can put it in the chat, or, we'll talk about it later. Or that if we have some big issue around that committee, we actually schedule time on the agenda to go into it more deeply. So managing committee reports, because that can burn up all sorts of time when people go on and on, but partly they're on this committee and they want to feel cared for and respected. So managing it.
We try to do the report outs, the committee report outs up to the committee chairs a week beforehand or a couple of days beforehand. And they are supposed to be short. Like, we're talking real fast, but I like the idea of talking real fast and then asking other people for like input, right? Because we just plow through them rather than taking a minute and actually saying, does anybody have any thoughts or questions on how we could do this better or something like that? That'd be way better. And if we took 30 minutes to do the boring stuff beforehand and we publish it so it's public and stuff, we would have a lot more fun hour than,
Yeah, and I think what Diane just said, passive versus active and engaging, the more you can make that, Julie, like what you just said, asking people for their feedback. They're not just passively having these things wash over them. How do people feel about that? Like that's a great facilitation thing. You don't have to have everybody speak, but what do people think about what we just heard? How are you feeling about that? What does
So
that
it's
mean
like
for our
Survey
neighborhood?
Monkey to keep people in front of their computer, moving their mouse around a little. Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Marita, do you have any other questions?
No, I think just a lot of good things to think about, and I really appreciate um, the presentation, just very in depth and really helpful. So thank you.
And I'm going to follow up with you on this oral history thing. I think
Thank you. I'm glad to know that you're doing it, and yeah, and we got some good ideas in the chat too to look at. Vanport Mosaic and Bridal Mile has a history museum where they already have some recordings.
oh, cool.
So we could we were a little off topic, but
Good turn
I
out.
have to run.
But you see,
Thank you,
that's the
everybody, for your
kind.
time, everyone.
Thank you,
Take care.
Julie. Take care.
yeah, but this is the kind of thing that keeps our volunteers excited and
But also
engaged.
for
So
you, on your radar, the fact that you said you're interested in that gives me the opportunity to engage with you because I'm interested in that. And
right.
we've both got energy around it, and we could then do something that then possibly could turn into a little guide for all neighborhoods to say,
Yeah.
here's something you could do, and here's some basic tips on how to do it. But
Yeah.
it's fun, engaging. We co-produce. So I'm going to look forward to contacting you about that.
Yes, please do. Thank you. And thank you very
Thank you,
much. Well, thanks
Marita.
Thanks,
again,
Marie.
Diane and Paul. Have a good night.
You
Appreciate
too.
it. You too.
Good
Thank you.
night. Bye.